You are listening to the Foreign Policy Focus podcast.
We cannot wait for the final proof. The smoking gun could come in the form of a mushroom cloud.
Haven't you driven enough people from their homes already? Bulldoze their villages, seize their property and their laws. They had no part in making it.
Now working in Libya with friends and allies, we've demonstrated what collective action can achieve in the 21st century.
Now the host of the show, Kyle Inslee.
This is episode 389 of the Foreign Policy Focus podcast. Got a little bit of a different show today. I had to record it early because I was going to be busy for a few days, so I'm not talking about current events, but rather just regime change more broadly. I think I'm going to approach it from kind of a unique angle from what we usually talk about with on the show and what you would hear other anti-war hosts maybe talk about this on. So I hope it's going to be interesting and a little bit of a fun show. If you like it, make sure that you share it. You find it online at the Libertarian Institute, where the show, along with my daily news roundup, are featured in the right-hand column of the homepage. If you like the show, you should subscribe to it somewhere via iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere people listen to podcasts. If you become a financial donor to the show at patreon.com/foreignpolicyfocus, $5 a month will get you into the live stream. Alright, so I'm talking about regime change on today's show. And one of the, I guess, difficult things about talking to people, especially, people who don't care much about foreign policy and don't really know what's going on in the world, out of supporting a regime change war, is that all they know is the fake narrative that, typically the government and through the mouthpiece of the mainstream media has conveyed to them. So let's use the example of the 2011 Libyan regime change war there, where Arab Spring comes to Libya. Islamist groups, including the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, this is Al-Qaeda linked fighters, veterans of the Iraq War, take over a good chunk of the country, and the dictator at the time responds by going through and trying to kill all the jihadists. Because I'm cynical, I think the Obama administration exploited this narrative to take out Gaddafi and, take down a regime they didn't like. I think many in the White House saw it as an opportunity to flex their foreign policy skills and show that, hey, they can micromanage the world and produce better results for the people. This would include Hillary Clinton, Samantha Power. Through their hubris, actually believed they were going to, do something great here. Although, they knew, I think they were exploiting the situation, and it really wasn't as dire as they made it sound. During the lead up here, they talked about Gaddafi carrying out a genocide, using a false statement to say that he was going to slaughter all the people in Benghazi. I believe these were lies, saying that he was giving his soldiers Viagra so they could rape women more. And that's why, we had to support this NATO air war on behalf of the Islamists, the Al-Qaeda linked, those guys. On behalf of them, we have to fight this war against Gaddafi. Well, by taking out Gaddafi's air power and carrying out airstrikes against his forces, his regime was quickly destroyed and he was murdered on the side of the road. Now, I could go through and debunk every lie, and I'm sure everybody who listens to this show knows how to debunk most of them, so I'm not going to go through it. It'll probably take 20-25 minutes about that narrative that claims Gaddafi was going to butcher his own people, so we had to do something to stop him. But I feel like when I have those conversations with people, they typically will buy about half or more of what I'm saying. I'm able to source pretty well, and I've talked about it enough to sound coherent, but at the same time, a lot of people just, aren't willing to go all the way to say, Obama's war in Libya helped Al-Qaeda? How could that be the case? And it's like, well, Al-Qaeda was the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group. And they're like, I don't know what that thing is. And it probably wasn't that important, or you misunderstand something. Certainly, what we would have actually done there wasn't help Al-Qaeda. But, that is the reality. So one interesting thing I guess we could do is to turn it a little bit. And rather than try to debunk all the lies, just say, well, all those things that you're going to blame Gaddafi for, America does them too, and at times to our own people. And so whether this is, Gaddafi and slaughtering his own people, Saddam Hussein building weapons of mass destruction, Kim Jong-un with his nukes in prison camps, and Putin suppressing protesters, let's talk about, some of the problems with the United States and maybe approach it from that kind of angle. Now, I'm guessing that anybody on the right is probably going to pretty quickly get irritated with you and walk away, but maybe there are some people who would find this argument effective. And I'm thinking mostly like the humanitarian interventionist types on the left that end up supporting just as many wars as the insane neocon types on the right just, because they want to save people, not the other way around. So the first one of these topics, if anybody was like, we need to get rid of a dictator because of WMDs, let's look at America's history of WMDs. We're the only country to use a nuclear weapon. We've actually used 2 on Japan. We're one of the few countries that won't pledge to not have a first strike. I believe even China and India have signed on to this, but the U.S. still maintains that they may carry out a first strike nuclear attack, which means anybody who may be on the receiving end of those arms always has to worry that the next missile coming in is the United States. The U.S. has a history of using chemical and biological weapons as well, so this is the main target against Assad, is, he gasses his own people. Now, again, for those of you who listen to the show, this is a great example. I've done 10 to 15 episodes with Will Porter debunking, I think, about every claim made against Assad for using chemical weapons in extreme detail and definitively proving it was not true. And yet, most people still believe that Bashar al-Assad used chemical weapons against his own people, and it's because CNN and all the mainstream outlets say one thing, and so even if they listen to your show and you say, they poke a lot of good holes in the argument, but, it's still just comfortable to say, that Assad guy is bad. Well, the U.S. has a history of using chemical weapons as well. Of course, supporting Saddam Hussein's use of chemical weapons in the 1980s against Iranians and Kurds, using Agent Orange in Vietnam, biological weapons. You could let the United States attempted to spread the plague in North Korea with biological weapons there. And so, the U.S. has a history of using WMDs of all kinds, unlike any other country on the planet. And yet we're going to walk around and wave our finger at regimes who we claim have WMDs, and that makes them dangerous. I think most regimes look at the United States and say, well, you have WMDs and you're definitely dangerous. Another common one used is that the bad guy, whatever dictator it is, supports terrorists. This is definitely one of the condemnations of Iran and Iraq, Saddam Hussein, prior to 2003. North Korea and Venezuela get this condemnation as well. Although how, these 2 countries are connected to Muslim jihad terrorism is always a head scratcher to most people. Or they don't think about it and just say, that guy supports terrorism. Well, let's look at the United States history of supporting terrorism. Libya in 2011 is a great example of us backing the Al-Qaeda fighters there against Gaddafi with our air war. Around the same time, we are launching Timber Sycamore, the CIA operation in Syria that armed up and trained rebel fighters, many of whom were either jihadists or jihadist tied. Many of them sold their weapons given to them by the United States and our allies to jihadist fighters, helped influencing and the rise of the Islamic State. We even have a DIA memo, I believe from 2012, saying that, hey, if we continue with this program, it may support the rise of the Islamic Caliphate in eastern Syria and western Iraq, and that's exactly what happened. You later had John Kerry even saying that they were hoping the Islamic State would be useful to the United States against Bashar al-Assad. Going back in time, you could look at the Mujahideen in the 1980s, the United States supporting terrorists there against the Soviets, this group being the precursor, to kind of Al-Qaeda, and became such a problem for the United States down the road. The war against the Houthis in Yemen, where the enemies of the Houthis are Al-Qaeda and the Arabian Peninsula, one of the most dangerous terrorist groups in the world. And rather than the United States working with the Houthis, which we are doing in 2014 to target AQAP, we're now working with the UAE and Saudis who are supporting AQAP in the war against the Houthis. Another flaw of any kind of country that the U.S. wants to regime change is that it bats other either bad regimes or bad actors. So if you look at like China and Russia's support for Maduro in Venezuela, the relationship that Maduro and the Castro regime in Cuba, along with Nicaragua, all have together, they're all kind of said to support each other, and this makes them all extra bad. Looking at some of the dictatorship that the United States supports, Saudi Arabia being one of the most repressive towards women and, pretty much anybody who isn't a part of like the male chauvinist hierarchy of that country. You look at Egypt, where you have a brutal military dictator there that has squashed protests in the most disgusting of ways, and of course is only in power because of a coup. The support for the Saudi war is probably the most disgusting thing the U.S. is doing right now. Selling bombs to that country that we know are going to blow up weddings, hospitals, schools, school buses packed full of little children, funeral halls packed full of mourners. All these things have been targeted by the Saudi war there, backed by the United States, and it's been going on for 4.5 years now. 2 years for 2 presidents, and neither of them took action and realized at any point in time that this war was an absolutely, humanitarian disgrace. The forces that we backed in the, government post the Iraq war during the civil war in Iraq committed horrible atrocities. Oftentimes in American movies, the atrocities committed by the U.S.-backed forces in Iraq are portrayed as being committed by the terrorists in order to, make it seem like the terrorists are all bad, when in fact it was the U.S.-backed forces committing a lot of those crimes. The bad to the own people one is something that we had to really turn to the United States to look at and realize that, yeah, we have some humanitarian problems in this country as well, and it's not quite so easy to go around and judge others. Now, there are definitely some differences here between maybe the kind of prison camps in North Korea and the prisons in the United States of America, but at the same time, the prisons in the U.S. are majorly flawed. I mean, if you look at some of the things that have gone on, a schizophrenic man died of thirst in his jail cell after guards turned his water off for 5 days, and the last day he laid on the floor begging for water for hours on end and was allowed to die there. Many prisons are in terrible shape. Many prisoners use blankets made of recycled trash, and so they really don't work. They fall apart. I think, a lot of people are allergic to them and then can't get new blankets. Many prisoners face slave hours at, wages of like less than $1, having to work in different kind of telecom or trash cleanup type jobs. Some of these prisoners report that if they don't agree to sign up for the jobs program, they end up being in solitary confinement or in another way punished. Now, somebody might say, well, prisoners are bad people and so they deserve all this. Well, let's get into that. So many of the prisoners in the United States are there for nonviolent drug crimes, which nobody should be in jail for. Others are there, for false reasons. So many people. A popular libertarian case to talk about is that of Ross Ulbricht. He at one point was involved with the Silk Road. However, the government just railroaded him, and that's the name, I believe, of a YouTube docuseries on his imprisonment. And he is now serving 2 life sentences for never harming anyone. But, this is just the tip of the iceberg in the probably thousands, if not tens of thousands, of people who are wrongfully imprisoned in the United States, either through bad evidence, aggressive and unfair prosecutorial practices. So many cases don't even see trial, and people just plead guilty to crimes they didn't commit because they don't believe they'll get a fair trial in the first place. All the numbers of discrimination in the U.S. justice system are quite obvious. It very clearly is more likely to give longer or, just at all jail sentences to minority groups. People in poverty, and I'm not conflating the two like Joe Biden does, are also much more likely to be victims of unfair, prosecutions in the United States. One of the big things, often cited and bad to the own people is that they oppress some sort of class that, should have some more protection. So the, Taliban oppressing women in Afghanistan. Iran will occasionally get this claim. Putin is, not LGBTQ friendly enough. And certainly in all these cases, the way these groups treat those minority groups is a problem. But look, the history and the legacy of slavery in the United States and just discrimination, Jim Crow, South Black, isn't that far in the history of the United States. So, it's not like we have clean hands there. But even if you move forward to today, I think the justice system, as I was talking about before, is the most clear example that, this kind of discrimination in either predatory police practices or, kind of discrimination-based policing. We had stop and frisk, the way, the TSA and the Department of Homeland Security targets Arabs, the way the FBI has targeted and entrapped so many Muslim youth into fake terrorism plots, talking about immigration police enforcement and how brutal that's become. Always a problem, but especially under the Trump administration. So many times now I see these plainclothes, officers come up, grab somebody and throw them in the back of the vehicle. I'm reading a very interesting story at The Intercept. I'll go ahead and link to this one on the show notes page, but it just goes to show how little the immigration enforcement officers, care about getting the stories right on the reports and stuff like that. They often seem to bully immigrants into saying something that makes it sound like they don't need asylum, or just straight up lying to them. I guess to one girl, they said, hey, if you say that you don't feel safe going back to your home country, you can never travel there again. Do you want to do that? And she said, no, saying like, I want to go, back to my home country, maybe at some point in the future. I can't commit to, never seeing any friends or family back there. And if situations change, who knows? But he took that to say that no, she was saying she didn't need asylum or didn't want asylum. They will, oftentimes point out how regimes have either treated dissident voices, protesters, or journalists, the Maduro, Putin, and I guess China would probably be the three places most where they kind of point out, in North Korea, there's not even a pretense of press freedom, I suppose. But they do, treat dissidents very poorly in that country. I don't want to understate that. But looking to the United States, the cases of Assange, Chelsea Manning, and Edward Snowden are pretty clear that we do not have a free and open press, and people cannot publish whatever they want. And the U.S. will crack down and attempt to, silence people exposing illegal spying, mass surveilling programs of the United States. Another reason that, hey, what are, we telling other people to do? We spy on everyone, including leaders of foreign countries. One of the most, I think, oppressive things you could have in a state is a mass surveillance and spying program. Talking about the kind of cultural or social credit systems in North Korea and China as reasons that those regimes are very dangerous. Yeah, well, the mass spying program and certainly all the information that's being collected on us all the time definitely censors people and changes, the way they act and behave. Let's talk about the torture program real quick. This is one of the worst things that the United States government has ever done under the Bush administration. Tortured a bunch of people, some to death. Many of those people have not been, none of them have been prosecuted, but many of them have not faced any kind of shame whatsoever. In fact, the current head of the CIA is a torturer. This isn't the kind of thing in democracy either, where one, administration got way out of hand, the next one came in and set it back. In fact, the Obama administration just looked right over all the torture program and let all the Bush administration officials that were involved with it go. And so, like I said, now there's some still in the government, but it was an extremely disgusting practice, and where, we even sent people to other countries like Syria and Libya to be tortured. While we don't look at, U.S. cops shooting people on the street as equivalent to Donald Trump ordering, the suppression of a certain group or that killing, whereas in Syria, if a Syrian cop or a soldier kills a civilian, it's chalked up as a death that Assad is responsible for. But carrying over that same standard, U.S. cops are able to kill a lot of people in the United States with impunity. Very rarely do they face any kind of repercussions for their actions, not even losing their jobs very frequently, and are able to just kind of get away with it. And so again, this is, something that if you're advocating for a regime change for, answer how we let people off in the United States, these cops, when they kill people. So my guess is if I really wanted to, I could go on for the next couple of hours talking about abuses with policing, Fourth Amendment violations, First Amendment violations, all kinds of oppressive, terrible things that the government does, to us and to other people. And, I really didn't get into examining that, comparatively to what any of these regimes are doing, either internally to their own people or to actors in the region. It doesn't compare to what the United States has done to the Middle East since 2001 with the wars, in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, Somalia, Yemen, Pakistan, Niger, all over. All these terror wars that we have waged, how destructive they have been to all these countries. If you're looking at, the worst, quote unquote regime on the planet, and I probably should be more careful about, calling the Iranian regime or the North Korean regime, but I think the word is just so ridiculous at this point. And the worst regime isn't Washington, the one that's carrying out, the most atrocities anywhere on the planet, treating its own people very poorly at the same time, condemning foreign leaders for doing so. I don't know if I have a whole lot to say, but, if you listen to this and you think, that's an interesting way to maybe talk to somebody who does have, these humanitarian interventionist beliefs, or thinks that, we need to carry out these regime change wars, to flip the script and say, hey, justify all the crimes of the U.S. government if you want to go around attacking other people. All right, share the show, foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com, libertarianinstitute.org, that's where the news roundup is as well, and then checkpointasia.net is another place you can find the podcast. That site is run by Marco Marjanovic. Good guy, been on the show in the past a couple times. Twitter at KYAAALE, Facebook.com, there's a private group, Foreign Policy Focus, and then patreon.com/foreignpolicyfocus.